Vera Holt was 19 years old when the bank's board of directors met behind a closed door in Ashcroft and decided her father's good name was worth less than their own comfort, signing away 16 years of honest work in a single meeting and sending her out with nothing but a leather roll of her father's finest picks and files, small brass oil can and a single silver dollar sewn into the hem of her coat. She had no cousin willing to take her in, no letter of character the bank had not already poisoned, and no reason to expect that a single soul in Ashcroft would lift a hand to help a locksmith's daughter once the board had spoken. But what those directors did not know, what they could not have known sitting so certain around their polished table, was that beneath the cellar floor of the old bank building itself, the one abandoned when the new vault was built, the plain unwelcome truth of what had actually happened that night had been waiting a very long time, sealed inside an iron box for someone patient enough to go and dig it out of the ground. Settle in and stay close, and let us know in the comments where in the world you're watching from tonight. To understand what happened to Vera Holt in the autumn, her father's good name went down with a robbery he had nothing to do with. You have to understand the trade that raised her, and the particular quiet discipline a locksmith's daughter learns before she learns much else. Her father, a locksmith named Thomas Holt, had come to Ashcroft 16 years before, a careful, exacting man who had trained as a boy under a master locksmith back east, and who had built, over a decade and a half, a reputation sound enough that every bank and strongbox and safe door for 50 miles around carried his mark somewhere on its workings. Vera's mother had died bringing her into the world, and Thomas Holt, left alone with a daughter and a trade that rewarded patience above almost every other virtue, had raised her at his workbench, setting a set of small brass tumblers into her hands before she was old enough to hold a proper conversation, teaching her, long before she learned her letters, that a lock was nothing more than a conversation between two pieces of metal, and that a person who understood that conversation could never truly be locked out of anything worth understanding. By the time she was 11, Vera could take apart and reassemble a simple padlock blindfolded, purely by feel, and by 16, her father trusted her to fit the delicate tumblers of a combination safe, because her hands, smaller and steadier than his own aging fingers, could feel a mechanism's smallest imperfection in a way his had begun to lose. Thomas Holt told her once, in the plain, unhurried way he told her most things that mattered, that a lock, like a person, remembered every hand that had ever tried it, that a mechanism forced or rushed would carry a looseness in its workings forever after, and that the whole of his trade, the entire reason men trusted the Holt name on a vault door, was that he had never once in 16 years sent out a lock he had not tested with his own two hands, until he was certain it would hold. This was the standard that had, 2 years before the robbery, earned him the contract to build the new time-lock vault door for the Ashcroft Merchants Bank, a commission Thomas Holt had poured more care into than into any piece of work he had built before. The trouble began, though neither Vera nor her father understood it as trouble at the time, in the year before the robbery, when the bank's newly appointed manager, a smooth, ambitious man named Walter Grimes, arrived from the capital with grand plans for expanding the bank's lending and, privately, with debts of his own that his salary could never hope to cover, debts owed to men considerably less patient than any creditor in Ashcroft. Grimes had watched Thomas Holt install the new vault door with an attentiveness the old locksmith mistook for simple professional curiosity, never once suspecting that the manager was memorizing the mechanism's every working part, with the specific intention of one day defeating it himself. And quietly, over the following months, Grimes acquired a duplicate set of the same specialized tools Holt used in his own workshop, sourced discreetly from a supplier 2 states distant, so that no order would ever trace back to Ashcroft. On a night in late October, Walter Grimes let himself into the bank after the last clerk had gone home, using his own manager's key to bypass the outer doors, and worked the vault's time lock open himself, patient as any trained locksmith, before loading a canvas sack with enough currency and gold coin to cover his debts twice over, and then, in the one flourish of genuine cleverness in an otherwise straightforward theft, he scattered a handful of fine metal filings near the vault's hinge, The kind of residue a lock leaves behind only when its tumblers have been forced, rather than properly opened. Filings he had saved for exactly this purpose from his months of secret practice on the duplicate mechanism at home. When the theft was discovered the following morning, the town marshal, a decent but unimaginative man named Marshal Farrow, found those filings exactly where Grimes had left them, and concluded reasonably enough on the evidence in front of him that the vault had been forced rather than properly unlocked, a conclusion that pointed every finger in Ashcroft toward the one man whose reputation rested entirely on locks that were never supposed to be forced at all. The bank's board of directors met within the week, and though Thomas Holt stood before them and explained, with the patient precision of a man certain of his own craftsmanship, that the filings found at the scene did not match the tolerances of any lock he had ever built, the directors, frightened by the loss and eager for a name to attach to it before their depositors lost faith in the bank entirely, decided that a locksmith who could not account for how his own vault had been opened was, at the very least, guilty of criminal carelessness if nothing worse, and stripped him of every remaining contract in town within the same meeting. Thomas Holt, his workshop's credit called in within days by suppliers who had heard the news before he had, took what tools remained legally his, and accepted a position 2 territories west repairing farm equipment, a trade far beneath what his hands had once been capable of, and he left Vera, now 19, a handful of days to arrange her own path before the workshop passed to a creditor's hands entirely. Vera did not weep in the empty workshop where her father's tools had once hung in careful rows, because she had watched him carry the weight of 16 years' good work erased inside a single meeting, and instead she packed his finest set of picks and files, a small brass oil can, and the single silver dollar he pressed into her palm at the last moment, into a leather roll, and she set out not toward the territory where her father had gone, but across town, toward the old bank building itself, the original structure the Merchants' Bank had abandoned 2 years before, when the new vault made it obsolete. Standing empty now except for whatever the bank had not bothered to move, she let herself in through a warped side door that had never been properly secured, since no one troubled to lock a building holding nothing worth stealing. And she spent that first night in the old cashier's office, cold and close with dust, and in the morning, restless and unable to simply wait for a fate she had not chosen, she began to explore the building her father had once serviced for years before the new vault ever existed, moving down into the old cellar where the bank's original, smaller strong room still stood, its door long since removed for scrap. It was while running her hand along the strong room's stone foundation that she noticed one flagstone near the old doorframe sat very slightly higher than its neighbors, its mortar a paler, finer shade than the stone around it, the particular kind of small discrepancy her father had spent years training her hands and eyes to catch in a piece of metalwork. She worked the stone free with one of her father's finest files, patient as he had taught her to be with anything worth doing properly. And beneath it, in a shallow cavity lined with oiled canvas, she found a small iron box, and inside it, wrapped against the damp, a bundle of papers, and on top of them, a letter, its ink faded but its careful hand still legible, addressed to whoever might one day find this place. The letter had been written by a former bank clerk named Josiah Marlow, who explained in a hand grown tight and urgent as it went on that he had worked under Walter Grimes for nearly a year before the robbery, and had noticed in the months leading up to it, Grimes quietly acquiring specialized locksmith's tools through a supplier out of state, tools no bank manager would ever have legitimate cause to own, and that when Marlow had asked him directly about the purchases, Grimes had laughed the question off but had, within the month, found a pretext to dismiss Marlow entirely, citing a discrepancy in the ledgers that Marlow swore, in his letter, had never existed before Grimes himself altered the books to manufacture it. Beneath the letter, Vera found Marlow's own careful copies of the supply invoices he had glimpsed on Grimes's desk before his dismissal, invoices matching precisely the specialized equipment a locksmith would need to defeat a time lock mechanism, and beneath those a final folded document, a sworn statement Marlow had prepared before a notary in the county seat after his dismissal, describing everything he had witnessed and his growing suspicion of what Grimes intended, a statement that had waited forgotten in the ground for nearly a year, because no one investigating a robbery blamed so conveniently on the locksmith had ever thought to search for a dismissed clerk's testimony instead. Vera sat a long while in the cold cellar with the papers spread across her knees, and she understood, with the same steady patience her father brought to any lock worth solving properly, that she was holding the one thing capable of proving her father's hands had never once failed anyone. In the morning, she wrapped the papers carefully back into their oilcloth, tucked the iron box beneath her arm alongside her father's tools, and walked, not toward the territory where her father now labored under another man's judgment, but toward the county courthouse where she presented herself, resolute despite her travel-worn dress, to a deputy county prosecutor named Mr. Ainsley, who examined Marlow's invoices and sworn statement for the better part of 2 days before informing her that evidence this precise would very likely reopen the entire inquiry. Word of what the locksmith's daughter had carried out of the old bank cellar traveled through Ashcroft faster and further than any careful denial could catch up to, and within a month the county had summoned Josiah Marlow himself, found working quietly 2 towns over to testify formally, and had issued a warrant for Walter Grimes's arrest on charges of theft, fraud, and the deliberate framing of an innocent man, though Grimes, forewarned by some sympathetic clerk, fled the territory before any deputy ever reached his door. The bank's board, faced with sworn testimony no director could argue against, issued Thomas Holt a formal public retraction within the same season, restoring both his reputation and every contract the town had stripped from him. And though Thomas Holt returned to Ashcroft older and slower than he had left it, he returned to a workshop full once more, this time with his daughter's name lettered beside his own on the door. Vera Holt was 19 years old, and in the autumn, a stranger's own crime was signed over into her father's name. She had walked away from a board of directors too eager to blame the nearest craftsman to look further, carrying nothing but a leather roll of picks and files and a single silver dollar sewn into her coat. And beneath a cellar flagstone in a building nobody bothered to lock, she had found not gold but the plain, patient, unbreakable proof that a lock built honestly will always, eventually, outlast the lie built to explain away its breaking. It was the best door she ever opened. If this story stayed with you, if you sat in that cold cellar with Vera while the morning light moved across Josiah Marlow's careful hand, take a moment before you go and tell us in the comments where you're watching from tonight. And tell us, too, about the person in your own life who taught you to trust the quiet precision of your own 2 hands over a stranger's convenient conclusion. Threndal Stories tells the quiet, unwritten stories of the American frontier, the ones history left out, about the people who were counted out and came back anyway. Subscribe to keep walking this road with us because the next quiet frontier tale is already waiting.